My name is James Greer. I work for the Utah Division of Water Rights. We're excited to have a lot of the water divisions represented here today, and we're excited to have all of you here today to help us put together this training. Some logistical things. We are recording this video so that future generations will be able to come and watch this beautiful presentation. But we're hoping it'll be a really nice training mechanism for us, for individuals that maybe aren't interested in ASR right now, but will be in the future. It's not something we get a lot of demand in talking about, but whenever we do, it's pretty intense to get all this information to each of the different individuals that might be interested in ASR. So we're really excited to have the three main water agencies that help regulate and permit aquifer storage and recovery applications here today. Like I said, I'm James Greer. I'm with the Division of Water Rights. We also have Candace Cady. She'll be presenting right after me. She's with the Division of Water Quality over at the Department of Environmental Quality, right? And she'll be talking more about the permits that are required for the Division of Water Quality. And then we'll have a break after that. But then Ying-Ying Macauley, close enough, we'll get up and talk about the Division of Drinking Water and what requirements they might have for the different projects that are proposed. And then finally, we'll have Paul Inkenbrandt from the UGS, who has done a few, I think, and my understanding, was it a master's thesis or just your coursework that you did was on ASR projects? Cache Valley projects. So he's got a lot of experience with ASR projects, and he's going to talk about some of the pilot projects that he's worked on and give some real practical, I hope, real experience on what to do and how to initiate an actual project, an ASR project. Other things, there are out those doors, and I think to the left down that way there are some restrooms if you need them. But we will be recording the conference, so if you could try to not take your cell phones and maybe stand up in front of our camera and block this, we'd appreciate that. If you could wait till the breaks to do that, that would be very helpful to us. But I do want to encourage questions. And so I will try to repeat your questions, or we have some mics if you have a long question that we'll bring around, and you can ask your question in the mic, and that's just so we get the question on the recording. It's always nice when you, I don't know if you've gone and, you watch a press conference and whatnot, and all you get are the answers, and sometimes the questions are kind of important to know what they're trying to answer, so we want to avoid that as much as possible. So I'll try to repeat the questions, but we'll have some mics going around. So if you do have a question, just raise your hand and they'll bring your mic to you, and we'll answer that question. And you too can be immortalized on our YouTube presentation that we're doing here today. I always love to hear my own voice on these. It makes me think. Actually, this last weekend I was up at Bear Lake with my family. We were at this wonderful place, and we finally had snow. We were so excited for snow, and in fact, we were playing in this hot tub. My kids convinced me to jump out of this hot tub and do some snow angels in the snow, and they recorded that. And so I'm sure that's now on YouTube. And in fact, while they were playing this back for me, I was like, man, who is that high squealing girl screaming during that process? And come to find out that was me. So every time I listen to this, I think, man, that cannot possibly be me, but it is. My voice does sound that bad. That's kind of the format we're going to go through. I'll give a presentation, but please ask questions throughout, and then we'll have all the panel here to ask questions throughout the whole presentation. The one thing I will ask is if your question is pretty specific to say you're doing a given ASR project right now and you want pretty detailed answers about your project, you can ask that question, but I might defer to come talk to you about it after, depending on if it's a very general question or something very specific to your application. So let's get started. So today I'm going to go over the division of water rights and what the legislation is and what we here at the Division of Water Rights are looking for our permitting process and what data we require to help issue those permits. So I'm going to go through that for just the Division of Water Rights. Okay? So I thought it'd be good to start off with, we have a few projects that are already permitted through the state. Here's a list of the approved ASR projects we have currently in the state, and here's the entities that have those projects. So we have some, the dots on the map are all the ones that have been applied for, but the names on the left are the ones that actually have been approved. So we have some all up and down the state, mostly along the I-15 corridor. But I will be using some of these as examples today throughout my presentation to talk about some of the different items that we permit and why we permit those items in such ways. So I wanted to kind of show this map so we kind of get a bearing of some of these projects around the state. Okay? So very key to the legislation that we have and what we have to describe often is that there are two permits for the Division of Water Rights. There's a recharge permit and there's a recovery permit, and they're separate. Commonly people file them together, but they don't have to be filed together. You can file just the recharge, and then later on you can file the recovery. And in some instances, actually, you may never file a recovery permit. You may not need that part. And I'll explain that a little bit later. But if you could take away from today that there's two different permits, this day will be a success for me. So I can describe that there's two separate ones that you need to do an ASR project for the Division of Water Rights. Okay? So I'm going to first start talking about the recharge permit. So the recharge permit requires some basic information on it. And here's kind of a list of that basic information. And I'm going to go into detail on each one of these, but right, you need the applicant information, right? Who are you? We got to know who's filing for this. A detailed description of the project, evidence of the water quality permits. You need a plan of operation, and I'm going to go into a lot of detail about the valid water right that you need to do these projects. And lastly, there's a fee. This has changed over the years, what this fee is, but you probably can't read that. It's probably too small. But a recharge permit is actually a smaller fee than the recovery permit. That's a larger fee. But the recharge permit, the fee is dependent upon the amount of water that you're going to be recharging, or the description of your project, right? So if it's a very small amount, if it's less than 20 acre-feet, your fee for a recharge permit is just $150. It's a very small fee. The larger the project, that fee goes up, and there's just this schedule. This is the same fee that you would have if you were filing a temporary application with us or a change application, right? It's a standard fee that we have for all those projects. It used to not be that way. So if you're expecting a big, large fee for this, it's changed. It's now just the standard fee if you're doing a recharge application. Okay? So now I'm going to go into detail on all these other bits that you need. First off, there are essentially two types of projects when you're talking about recharge. There's either injection wells that you're recharging that water through. You're pumping it down a well, down into the aquifer system. Or there's an infiltration basin, right? Some sort of pond, basin that you're pooling that water in and allowing gravity to let that water infiltrate down into the ground and down into the aquifer system. So it's key to understand those two separate types because we permit those differently. Okay? So there are variations of these, right? So sometimes there's shallow wells that could be looked at more like an infiltration basin than an actual injection. I've seen projects where they have French drains that they're running back and forth just underneath the surface that they're filling with water and allowing that to seep into the ground. Right? So there's variations, but a majority of the projects are either a well that you're pumping the water down or an infiltration basin where you're spreading that water out and letting gravity infiltrate that into the ground. Okay? So I wanted to kind of understand those because we'll talk about those a lot today and why they're permitted differently. Let me make sure here. Yeah. Water quality permits. So our application that we have for a recharge application, one of the conditions is that you have the appropriate water quality permits required by these other divisions to recharge water into the groundwater. I'll allow them to talk about their permits, but the thing that we will require is that you have those permits. Now, we don't make you get those permits before you file with us, so you can do them in tandem, right? So you could file the necessary applications with their offices at the same time you're filing those applications with our office, but we will just condition your approval that you have those permits in hand before you recharge that aquifer. Now, if you do have those permits ahead of time, those are great things to attach to your application. And in fact, many times we'll get their application attached to our application to show that they have filed for those permits already, just to give us understanding so we know that they have been working with their office, you have filed those permits. And many times when they do issue those permits, people will issue that to us, provide supplemental documentation to their application to show that those have been completed. And we will want those at our office at some point, either before the application is filed or after that application is filed, to know that those have been completed and done. But I'll allow them time to talk about those. The key takeaway, I think, here is you can do those in tandem. It's not in series, right? Okay. So our recharge application talks about a plan of operation that you need to have when you file for a recharge application. Essentially what that is a detailed description of the project, right? What's your design capacity? How much water are you going to be recharging? It talks about a monitoring program. What's your monitoring program? So a monitoring program is different depending on the type of application, right? So we don't have set rules that say for this type you're going to do this, but we look at each one individually and come up with a program for each one. So a monitoring program for, say, an injection well type is obviously going to have, you're going to have to meter how much water you're injecting. That's part of the monitoring program. Many times we're going to talk about, you're going to have some monitoring wells set up around that injection. Depending on the project, you might not need any, but you might need some to help understand how much water is actually being recharged, how that water is moving through the system. For a infiltration pond, the monitoring program is going to be a little different. Let me catch up with my notes here to make sure I don't miss anything. The monitoring program is going to be a little different in that for a well, it's very easy to measure how much is being injected into the ground. For an infiltration basin, that's more difficult to understand and know how much water is actually infiltrating into the aquifer system. So what we normally require on these is a very detailed monitoring plan of saying, okay, let's just take example a pond. Weber Basin Water Conservancy District has an infiltration basin pond. We require a very detailed metering of how much water they're putting into that pond. And if they are pulling any water out of that pond, we require that to be metered as well. And then we do a mass balance calculation on that pond. So the other big output we need is how much water is being evaporated off of that pond. And so in many instances, we require a weather station to be set up near that pond, or evaporation monitoring station, so that they could estimate what the evaporation is. And so you can say what's coming in, what's going out, what's evaporating. The difference between those numbers is what's being infiltrated into the ground. So if you're going to do an infiltration basin, those are the sort of monitoring that we're going to require so that we can calculate and know how much water is actually being recharged. Additionally, we might ask for some monitoring wells to be placed around so that we can track to make sure that that's actually happening, to confirm that there's water being infiltrated in the ground and you're seeing a response to that infiltration. Increased water levels, where that water is moving after it's being infiltrated. And those sort of information help us when we get to the recovery application, which I'll talk about later. That's essentially the monitoring program. Do I have any questions about that before I move on from monitoring program? Okay. We also need to know what's the duration of this project, right? Is it something that you're going to be looking at, I'm going to take winter water that I have a right for, and I'm going to inject that into the ground during the winter, and then in the summer, I'm going to be pulling that same water back out and using it? Is it going to be like a annual project? Or is this something that's going to be, I'm going to be storing water in the ground long term that 10 years down the road, I'm hoping in drought conditions, I'm going to be able to recover? That's the duration of the project. We want to know that sort of information on your application because that helps us understand and set guidelines for this type of project. And then the application asks for a groundwater study. And what that essentially means is, what kind of groundwater system are we talking about here? What's going on? What's the area of hydrologic impact? What's the feasibility of this project, right? And I think Paul's going to talk a lot about this when he gets to his part of the project, the presentation today. You know, are you putting your recharge basin down in the valley on top of a bunch of clay sediments that the gradient's up, right? You know what? We need to understand, is this project going to actually work? Is water actually going to infiltrate into the ground? Are you pumping water into an aquifer that's already full, right? That's not going to recharge well? Those sort of things. And then I think I've highlighted in green here, how much water do you believe is going to be recoverable from this project? And when I talk about the recovery application, I'll talk about what that means in a lot of detail. And just, does your entity have the financial and technical capability to complete this project? I don't think that's ever been an issue with someone, but it could be if in the future. Type of projects. This plan of operation we're talking about, I heavily encourage entities to do a pilot project, right? A recharge application is a pretty simple application. I believe in our office, it's something we can easily act on. So if one of the key takeaways here, before you do a pilot project, even a pilot project, we want you to file a recharge application, even for the pilot project, okay? There have been times in the past when we haven't required that or have difference of opinions, but now, if you're going to recharge water in the ground, even for a pilot project, we want a recharge application filed. And I think we can act on those relatively quickly, right? Those pilot projects help, and if you're doing an application for a pilot project, you note that on your application. Say, this is for a pilot project. All of this information, this plan of operation, the design capacity, the monitoring program, we're going to develop that with our pilot project, right? So you don't have to have all the answers up front. You're going to use that pilot project to help define those answers. And so you file that recharge application. It helps you understand the feasibility and it helps you define all those parameters. Okay? So later on, when you go to say, okay, we've done our pilot project, now we're ready to file the encompassing recharge application, you can do another application which is much larger, so the fee might be greater, to say this is our full application that we're going to be doing based on the parameters of our pilot project that we did. Okay? So I want to spend a lot of time talking about valid water right. I'm sure that's probably small to read. I just want it on the slides so that, all of these slides will be available. I think some have been printed out, but they'll all be available on our website. And actually this recording will also be available on our website for you to download and view for your future reading enjoyment. But a valid water right is very, very critical. Okay? To do a recharge project, you have to have a valid water right, and you have, or permission from an agreement with another entity to use their valid water right. And it has to, that water right has to have the ability for you to store that water, right? So, for example, you can't take an irrigation water right and say it has a season of use for a summer and go to a spring that you're using for that water right and take that water out during the winter and store it and then try to pull it out to use for your irrigation in the summer. If your water right's limited to a summer time frame, you can't go beyond your water right to store that water in the winter time, right? Even if you have a municipal right on a spring, you have to look at your water right. You can't go beyond that water right. Now, say that irrigation water right, you try to store it in the winter, that water that you weren't storing was going down that channel, most likely hitting a stream, and someone else was using it. So you'd be impacting someone else if you were using it out of the restrictions of that given water right. So we spend a lot of time making sure, this is, in a recharge application, this is the most critical thing we look at. Is your water right, is it available to be stored at the times you're wanting to store that water right? Okay? And the next, before I get to the next item, I hear this all the time. I have a leaky reservoir. Can I now file a recharge application on that water that's been leaking for the last 100 years? Right? And most of the time the answer is depends. But the scenario where you have let's say you're diverting water out of a stream, you're storing it in a reservoir, and say it's an on-stream reservoir, right? You have a dam and you're storing that water, and you're diverting out of that reservoir for your irrigation or whatnot. The water that has been leaking, it's not like it's going to nowhere. That water is coming down, probably leaking around the reservoir. Some point down the stream, it's getting back into that stream and is being used by someone else. So that leakage of that reservoir most likely is already appropriated by someone else. It's outside the bounds of your water right that you're using. Okay? So if you're trying to file a recharge application on that, then our answer most likely is going to be no, you can't file a recharge application on that. Now there are different scenarios, right? Say you're diverting water and taking it across a basin to another drainage basin, and you have it in an off-site reservoir, and you've always done that, there is a chance and maybe a possibility you could say, yeah, I could file for recharge on that water because that's all import water, and that's looked at differently than water that's in a given basin. I hope I answered that question clearly, because I get that question all the time. The other thing that we get all the time that's an issue is the recharge application is just an application to take your water and store it in the ground. It's not a change application. You can't take an irrigation water right, file a recharge application on it, and then take it out and use it for municipal use. If you want to use your water right in some other manner, you have to file a change application on that water right. Recharge only allows you to store what your underlying water right allows you to do. I hope that's clear, because we get that question all the time. So if you already have a municipal water right that you're filing a recharge application on to store in the groundwater, and then you're going to pull it back out to use for municipal, that's just fine. But if you have an irrigation water right or some other type of water right and you want to use it for something else, you have to file a change application when you go to use that water right. Okay? Any questions on water rights? So when you file your recharge application, you're going to, on the application, point to the water rights that you're using to recharge that water. Okay. Any questions on recharge applications as a whole before I move on to recovery applications? Okay, so a recovery application, separate. Once again, we need the applicant information. What's interesting in the law is it's set up that you can file multiple recovery applications on one recharge application. There was this idea that an entity could file for a recharge and different entities would file to recover that water. That's never happened, but you can do that. So you also need the consent from the owner of a recharge permit that you can recover their water. Most of the time it's been the same entity, so we're pretty sure that entity has the consent of themselves to do it. But you would need that consent if you were a different entity. The recovery application has the wells that you're going to be recovering that water. Many times, if it's the same well you're pumping down, you're going to be recovering out of. But it doesn't have to be, especially for an infiltration basin, right? That infiltration water, you're going to be recharging. You're going to be recovering that water through these wells. So we need all those wells you're going to be using to recover. And the location of those wells is really important. Specifically, when we get to talk about the parameters of how long we allow that water, that storage account, to remain in the ground before some losses start occurring to it, where those wells are. And I'll talk about that. The fee for this one is $2,500. It's more. The reason for that is we spend a lot more time on these recovery applications because of this storage account that we set up and because of these loss parameters that we're trying to define for those accounts. Okay? So that's the other big thing that we'll set up when we talk about recovery applications is we set up these storage account parameters. And I'll talk about that here now, I think. Oh, no. First, so both recharge and recovery applications have a proof time frame set in statute that you get 5 years from when you get your approval to when you have to get the projects constructed and in operation. You can extend that time and file for extensions of time. There's no limit to how far you can extend those, but it is set that you get 5 years to start. Almost all of these, we're going to permit it with some sort of monitoring program that you're going to have to set up, which will be required at the time when you submit proof that you have set up that monitoring program. The conditions are going to be, you're going to have to report to us how much water is stored and how much water you're recovering under the program. I've already mentioned the water quality permits. We're going to need copies of those when you go to submit proof. We're going to set up this storage account. Interesting, the law does give the Division of Water Rights the permission to ask for an annual fee on these projects. We've never done that, but it is something maybe if we look at this program gets bigger and larger and we're expending more and more staff time on these projects, we might start asking for an annual fee submitted for these, but we haven't up to this point. And the other key thing here that I want to bring up is it's a little different than some of our other applications in the office. This one actually has a provision in the law that says these permits can be modified at any given time based on the request of the applicant. And we do that actually, we've done that in the past. where we've set up a project, it's been permitted, and as they've been running this project over the years, they obviously start learning more and more about the aquifer, about the project, about how long the water stays within their zone of influence, and they request to us, hey, we think those parameters you set up should be modified or changed in such a manner. And we've reissued those permits based on those changes and the new information that that's been collected. So don't think that initial approval is like the end. As you gather more information, we'll modify the parameters of the project upon request of the applicants. So you have time to learn and change over time. They can be adaptable, these projects. So I want to talk about the storage account that gets set up from these projects. When a recharge application gets filed, we set up a storage account. You don't have to file the recovery yet. You can file the recharge, and you can start recharging water. And as soon as you do that, you are required to report to us monthly how much you recharged into the ground. And we will start recording this account, okay? January 2018, they put 1,000 acre-feet of water into the ground. We'll put that in there. Boom. February, they put this much. We'll put that in there. And it creates this account. If I have time, I'll show you some of the accounts that we have on the system. And those just start growing. And it's like this bank. We start crediting you all this water that gets put into your reservoir, right? When you go to file your recovery application, or if you filed your recovery application at the same time, we'll set up what we call storage parameters. The first one is an initial wait period. That's what we call it. And what that means is, for every amount of water you recharge, you have a time period that you can recover that exact same amount of water with no loss accounted for it. Usually it starts with a year. We've never permitted one that was less than a year time frame. So if you recharge water in January of 2018, you could pull that same amount of water out of the aquifer with an approved recovery permit in that same year till the next January, right? Some of them are a lot longer, and it depends on where you're at. Then we apply what is a loss factor. So after that year, we'll say, okay, we believe that, let's say 10%. Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, the first one that we did, ASR project that we permitted, they have 1 year to, once they put water in, they could pull that same amount of water out in that same year. But after the first year, they get a 10% loss to that water. So that next year, they can only pull out 90% of whatever they put in the previous year. And then 2 years later, it would be 80%, 70%, and it kind of goes down like that. Okay? Question?
Yeah, where do those numbers come from? Your loss? Is that like based on any sort of, I don't know, study or evidence?
I'll repeat your question. So he asked, where did those loss numbers come from? Is it based on a study or some evidence? And yes, that's where that groundwater study we're talking about completing, that's where we get that information from. We'll look out and see if we have additional information, but that's where that pilot program really helps us develop those parameters so that we can develop those loss parameters. Now, if there's a lack of information, we're probably going to be more restrictive on those to make sure and protect that we're not going to interfere with somebody else. Now, as more information is gathered, those are usually the things that we get requests from the applicant saying, hey, we've gathered more information. We don't think there's as much loss. And we'll evaluate that and we'll extend those sort of periods based on the more information that we get. So, and I'll talk a little more about that here in just a second. Before I move on, I want to talk month of loss is when that loss gets applied. So normally you'll see three parameters. It's initial wait period, you get a year before anything, and then after a year you get a loss factor of say 10%, and we're going to apply that in December. That's the month that gets applied. So if you applied water in January, you can pull out that same amount of water all the way through the next January, and then all the way to the next December before that loss gets applied to that given set in January. Okay? So this gets to your point. What do we consider when we're looking at setting those parameters? The type of recharge matters, right? If you're pumping water right into the aquifer, that water is immediately in there, and then it's going to immediately start moving. So that's going to be taken into account. If you're using an infiltration basin, it's going to take a while for that water to percolate down into the groundwater system. And so we want your groundwater study to help determine how long does it take? Because if it takes a year, years for it to even get down to the groundwater system and then start moving, we're going to take that into consideration, and your loss period is you're going to have more time before we're going to assess a penalty to that aquifer, that amount of storage that you have. The location of your recovery wells really matters, specifically in unconfined aquifer systems. Because if you have an unconfined aquifer, that water's getting down into there, and you've got space for that water to fill up, right? And it's going to start moving with the general movement of that system. If your recovery wells are situated such that they'll be able to capture that water for more time, you're going to get more time to be able to capture that water, right? Now, your recovery wells, we're not talking a lot of times, you don't need to pump the same particle of water down and recover that same particle of water over here. We're looking at more the effect on the system. We even actually have one application where the recovery wells are above the recharge basin, right? Someone said, that's ours, right? So, and that's okay. That can work if the impact on the system makes it so everyone else down gradient still gets the water that they're entitled to. Okay, you're not interfering with someone else. Unconfined systems, we found, make better recharge projects than confined systems. If you think of a confined aquifer that you're pumping water down into, we don't look at the time that that particle of water takes to get from out of your influence. If you're pumping into a confined system, think of it like say a balloon, right? You're pumping into a confined system. It's already full, but it expands that aquifer a little bit. The particles shrink to make it fit. But somewhere down gradient, that also might mean that it's causing increased discharge out of that aquifer system that would interfere with someone else's water right. So those parameters that we set up might be a lot less than the time it takes that given particle of water to move through that aquifer and out the other side. Because your influence on that aquifer is causing increased discharge or causing that water, that influence of your ability to recover to be quicker than that. It's kind of an interesting concept, but I hope that makes sense. So when you're developing this plan, it's very important to know, is this a confined system? Is it an unconfined system? What's the hydraulic conductivity of that system? How does that water move through that system? And those are the kind of things we're looking at when we define those parameters. But like I said, those can be modified as we get more information. Washington County Water Conservancy District application is a very good example of that. We initially, Sand Hollow Reservoir, do I have a map? Yeah. So Sand Hollow Reservoir down to the very bottom of the state is a recharge basin. It's a very large one, right? And they have this great, large, unconfined sandstone aquifer sitting underneath that reservoir. And it is seeping, and it is filling up, and it is just slowly moving, right? And they have a set of wells that surround that reservoir down gradient that they can pump that water back out. And so they initially got a application in that said, okay, we're going to give you a 1-year weight loss period. But after they discovered more time, they now have 10 years that they can store that water in. And now they're actually asking for more time because they're finding it's taking that water's going down there and it is just slowly moving. They think it's going to take hundreds of years before the influence of that water is going to reach the Virgin River. So they have a lot of time for it to be within their system to be able to pull it back out and not impact or interfere anybody else. Oh, wow, I've gone a long time. Last notes I wanted to take. This is a screen capture of the online interface people use to report their water. We periodically review these applications, and we have an online reporting system where when you're recharging aquifer, you report that to us, and when you're recovering water, we take that off your account. We always take off the most senior water you've put in so that they make sure that that doesn't get any loss applied to it. We try to make the benefit to that storage account. And that concludes my presentation. If you have specific questions about your given application and your water right, please come up after and talk to me. Key elements are, there's two different applications, a recharge and a recovery. We set up a storage account when you go to do those. One thing I didn't mention, the entities that never file a recovery application, some of these entities, they're pumping water into the ground to bolster that groundwater system because maybe there's a water quality problem and they're pumping good quality water in there and kind of creating this bubble of good quality water. But they have other water rights that they already have at those wells that they haven't utilized yet that they're just going to pump out, and they use those. So they're not necessarily recovering the water that they pumped in. They're using their other water rights and pulling that same water out and using it. So they're not interfering with anybody else because they've replaced the same amount of water they've put in that they've pulled out. But then later on, maybe they get to a point that they need to, their city's grown so much and they want to recover that water. Later on, they can file a recovery for that application as well. We'll create that storage account and start getting building. Or there are applications out there that they never intend to file a recovery. One example is the Central Iron County Water Conservancy District has a recharge application just to bolster the groundwater system that they use, they have a critical management area where they're overdrafting, mining their groundwater system there. So they are recharging that groundwater system whenever they get high peak flows or things that would go out and just evaporate off the playas. They're trying to recharge that so they could bolster the aquifer system so they could pull water out under their already existing rights that they're pulling under. So they never intend to file a recovery application. So depending on your situation, you can do one or both. And so with that, do we have any questions for me before I turn the time over to Candace? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, well, my name's Candace Katie. I am a geologist with the Division of Water Quality. I have worked for water quality since 1999, and I have been administering the UIC program since January of 2003. So do the math, that means I've been doing this for 15 years. Prior to working with, okay, okay. Prior to working for the Division of Water Quality, I was back in Indiana where I worked actually for a consulting firm whose primary business activity was servicing Class 1 underground injection control programs. So a large part of my professional activity has been in injection wells. So today I want to give you a very brief overview of the underground injection control program and show you where the ASR injection wells fall into that. I'd like to talk to you about the role of the UIC program and what part that plays in ASR projects. Then I'm going to talk to you and walk you through the permit application we have put together, and then talk to you about what the permit itself, when we finally issue a permit, what that looks like. Okay, let's talk a little bit about where the UIC program came from. Okay, back in July of 1980, EPA promulgated the first rules for the UIC program. And the program is authorized under Section 1472 of the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. Utah has primacy to administer that program, the 1422 part of the program. The 1425 part of the program covers Class 2 injection wells, and that is administered by the Utah Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. The purpose of the UIC program is to protect drinking water aquifers from contamination by injection activities. This purpose is codified as the UIC protection standard in 40 CFR 144.12. And just so you know, there are 6 classes of injection wells, and ASR wells are a subclass of a Class 5 injection wells. And also, just as a little aside, there are 40 and counting subclasses of Class 5 injection wells in the UIC program. Okay, so I talked about an underground source of drinking water. This is a very important concept in the UIC program, and as far as I know, this term is unique to the UIC program. It means an aquifer or a portion thereof which A, supplies a public water system, or which contains sufficient quantity of groundwater to supply a public water system, and either currently supplies drinking water for human consumption, or it contains fewer than 10,000 parts per million total dissolved solids, and it is not an exempted aquifer. So let's go back and look at this phrase, contains a sufficient quantity of groundwater to supply a public water system. Well, I talked to my colleagues at EPA Region 8, and EPA has interpreted that phrase to mean that the aquifer can deliver water at a sustainable rate of 1 to 2 gallons per minute at least. So that's pretty low. So just about any kind of water that can deliver at that rate and meets the other criteria can be a USDW. Okay, now also the last bit, B, is not an exempted aquifer. This is more relevant to Class 3 injection wells where they're in situ mining of salts or minerals, so I'm not going to get into that. It also applies to Class 2 injection wells, which are associated with oil and gas operations. So now we've talked about what a USDW is. Let's talk about what an injection well is. And this definition is in the regulations. An injection well is defined as a bored, drilled, or driven shaft whose depth is greater than the largest surface dimension, or a dug hole whose depth is greater than the largest surface dimension, or an improved sinkhole. We don't have a lot of those here in Utah, but what that basically means is any naturally occurring fissure into the subsurface, or a subsurface fluid distribution system, such as a drain field, a tile drain, or some such thing, as long as that occurs under the natural gradient of the surface of the ground. Okay, so I want to clarify a point here. So subsurface penetration, such as wells or dug holes, may seem to meet the definition of an injection well under the UIC rules, but they are only injection wells if the purpose for constructing these penetrations is for the subsurface emplacement of fluid into the ground. Okay, so just because you dig a hole and it's deeper than it is at surface dimension, doesn't mean it's an injection well, huh? Unless you purposely mean to put fluid into it, all right? Okay, so there is a link between the UIC program and the groundwater protection program. In the Division of Water Quality, there is a section called the Groundwater Protection Section. There are 2 programs that lie within that section. That section is administered, manager is Dan Hall. So it's the state groundwater protection section and the state underground injection control program. Okay, forgot to click forward. But the link between the UIC program, which is permitted by rule under the state groundwater rules, states that no facility permitted by rule may cause groundwater to exceed groundwater quality standards or the applicable class TDS, total dissolved solid limit. If the background concentration for the affected groundwater exceeds the groundwater quality standard, the facility may not cause an increase over background. Okay, so we can't inject something that's going to cause the groundwater to exceed what's there. Okay, so if your proposed ASR project involves injecting into, into a USDW by means of an injection well, as we defined earlier, then you're going to need a UIC permit. But before you do that, come to me. You also want to do what we're doing today. You want to talk to the people at Water Rights, James Greer, the people at Water Resources. They have a pot of money that may help you implement this. You want to talk to the Utah Geological Survey. Paul Inkenbrandt's here. Very helpful in doing the technical assessment, site assessment. Drinking water, especially if you're going to be proposing to use one of the community production wells. And then the underground injection control program here. Now, one thing I want to say right now is that if your proposed ASR project is not into an injection well, but rather through an infiltration basin, as James mentioned before, you may need a groundwater discharge permit under the state groundwater protection program. You need to talk to Dan Hall, who is the section manager. He covers that program. All right. So now I'd like to talk to you about the permit application package. That package is available at that website. And here is a little clip of the section where you want to go to. It is a specific application form for ASR permits. There is an application fee of $5,400. However, we do not charge that fee for municipalities. So in practical matter, since most of our ASR projects are with municipalities, we never really apply that permit fee. So let's see. So you can download it here, and that fee, if you want to know, is based upon 60 hours of staff time to review a permit application, and then we charge $90 an hour for our time. And so if you come to us, and we keep track of the hours, we have a billing code for the project.
Candace,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
$90 per hour also apply to municipalities?
You know, it does not. So I know you're from Millville and you're like freaking out over that cost. We will not apply that to you because you are a municipality. Okay. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Gentleman asked a question, does the $90 an hour apply to municipalities? No, it doesn't. We do not charge municipalities for this.
I have another question.
Yes.
How does this relate to the groundwater management plan? So
Okay, that's the Division of Water Resources.
how does this relate to the groundwater management plan?
Did it? Yeah.
And how does that relate to the groundwater management plan by the Division of Water Rights, I think, is what it is?
I'm not. I don't know how it relates to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the permit application. The permit application consists of two parts. And the first part is the application form, which is pretty short. And then there's a much longer part of it, which is the technical report. And just so you know, everything you'll see from here on out when I discuss the form and the technical report, this is all required by rule, okay, to be addressed. So it's either in our rule or it's in the part of the Federal Register that Code of Federal Regulations that are incorporated by reference into our state UIC rule. All right, so let's take a look at the form. It's pretty straightforward. First of all, we want to know what type of permit application it is. Is it just the first time you are coming to us for an application for an ASR, or are we talking about a permit renewal or a permit modification? There are some instances in which there will be enough changes that we will ask for a completely new permit application. Hasn't happened so far. Most of our applications for ASR projects are just initial. And then number 2 is the type of permit. We issue permits for either individual wells or areas, an area permit. So I believe that the Brigham City and the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District permits are both area permits, and the Leamington permit is an individual well permit. We need to know who the facility operator is and the facility owner. And just so you know that if the owner and the operator are different, it is the operator's responsibility to submit the application, okay? The facility status, we need to know if this is a federal, state, private, public, or other sort of entity. This is required information from the regs. We need a list of people who are authorized for the applicant during the processing of the permit application. Just going to help us in the processing so we know who to contact. Okay, and then we need a list of activities conducted at the facility that require environmental permit under the federal, state, or local statutes, rules, or ordinances. We need a list of environmental permits or construction approvals received or applied for relevant to this facility or this location under federal, state, local statutes, rules, or ordinances. So, of course, that will include the applications for the Division of Water Rights and possibly under Ying-Ying's Division of Drinking Water. And we need a brief description of the ASR project. We need a location of the ASR project. And if the proposed ASR project is located on Indian lands. This is an important one. So the reason it's important is because if it's located on Indian lands, then the state UIC program does not administer the UIC programs on those tribal lands. If the tribal land is north of the Colorado River, you will need to contact the UIC program in EPA Region 8 in Denver. If it is south of the Colorado River, you need to contact people in San Francisco EPA Region 9. Okay? And then we also have a requirement to be a certification that needs to be signed. This is also out of the regulations. And we have an additional requirement that any permit application, any reports, technical reports being submitted on behalf of for the permit needs to bear the seal of a professional geologist or a professional engineer. All right, so any questions on the permit application form? That's pretty straightforward. Okay. All right, so the technical report outline is much more extensive, but as I said earlier, this is all required by the regulations. So we need to, first of all, you need to determine the area of review. In Utah, the default area of review is a 2-mile radius around either the well or the project area, if it's an area permit that you're looking for. You need to submit several maps along with your applications. We have a map of the facility and the well, or for an area permit, a project area, map of the area of review, maps of and cross-sections of USDWs, maps and cross-sections of local geologic structure and lithology, maps of cross-sections of regional geologic and hydrologic setting. And you will need to have a tabulation of data for any artificial penetrations within the area of review that penetrate into the injection zone of your ASR project. You will need to prepare a corrective action plan for any of those artificial penetrations that are not properly plugged or abandoned or cemented properly. And why we're saying that is that if they are not properly cemented, they could act as conduits for formation fluids up into overlying USDWs that you're not using for your injection purpose. We need a formation testing program if this is part of your program, if this is what you intend. If not, we just say, okay, it's not needed. A well stimulation program if you need to increase the injectivity of your injection zone. We will need the injection well construction plan. We will need the construction details of your injection well. And we also need your injection well operation and procedure plan for that. This, I want to just say right now is that a lot of this that is required for the UIC permit application looks like things you're going to have to submit to James in your recharge permit application as well. Okay, and then we need a monitoring, recording, and reporting plan. We need a contingency plan in case your injection, something goes wrong with your injection well, you can't do it, there's problems with water quality. What are you going to do if you can't use your injection well to do this? A plugging and abandonment plan. Now, in reality, what we do is we look, do you have plugging and abandonment plans under the Division of Water Rights, under the Division of Drinking Water? If you do, if you have plans, then we're not going to ask for a separate, different plan under the UIC program. We just need to know what you are submitting for other state entities or local entities. Financial responsibility for plugging and abandoning plan. We need to know that you are, if you're going to walk away from your ASR project and we end up having to plug and abandon this well, we need to know that we have financial responsibility to cover that. And finally, and this is something that's unique to the UIC for the ASR project, we would like to see a hydrogeologic assessment report or plan to do so, prepare one, a geochemical assessment report or a plan to prepare one, excuse me. This should look very, very similar. James requires some of this from his, for his applications as well. The geochemical assessment is unique to the UIC program, I believe, because we have had evidence around the country in which highly oxygenated water that's being injected into an injection zone can actually cause the release of arsenic from pyritized injection zone material, which could actually cause the concentration of arsenic to go above MCLs. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're not going to have any detrimental geochemical interactions between the injectate and the native formation water. Okay. Okay, so that before I start talking about what your permit's going to look like, does anybody have any questions about what the application requires? Okay, you can look in detail. This is just the outline that I gave you. You can look in detail at the application form and see what the details you need to submit. The permit, you can also look at several permits that are available online, so you know what an actual permit looks like, excuse me. But basically the UIC ASR permit will consist of 3 parts. First part will be 2 or 3 pages long. It basically has a summary of your ASR project, and it's signed by the executive director. Part two of the permit is called the general permit conditions. Based on federal regulations, there are certain parts of the federal regs that either need to be explicitly referenced in the permit or they need to be included in the permit. Well, I feel you're going to end up with a longer permit from me because I don't want to make you go running through a bunch of CFRs to see what the general permit conditions are. So I brought all of that information from the various federal regulations into part two. So it's all there, so you don't have to go hunt for it. Part three is a specific permit condition. So this is the part that you want to pay attention to. I mean, certainly you want to pay attention to general permit conditions too, but for the most part, general permit conditions is boilerplate for all UIC permits. The specific permit conditions is where the uniqueness for your project will be. Duration of the permit. Now, this is a Class 5 permit, and Class 5 permits can be issued for 10 years, up to 10 years. So that's what it will be. A compliance schedule. If we determine, based upon your application and the information you provide, if you need some remedial activity to occur before you can start injection, then it will be listed in the compliance schedule. So for example, if you don't have an operating plan or a monitoring plan that you submitted with your permit application, then we're not going to let you inject until you've developed an approvable operating plan or monitoring plan, just for an example. There are construction requirements for UIC wells. They'll be listed in subpart C. And then if we have any requirements prior to authorizing the injection, those will be listed as well. We have operating requirements, monitoring and recording requirements, reporting requirements, plugging and abandonment requirements, financial responsibility. Now, this should all look very familiar to you because we've already asked you to provide this information in the permit application. Well, many of the plans that you will develop as part of the permit application, once they're approved, will be included as enforceable attachments to the UIC permit. Okay, so, and this will look familiar, you'll need to have your general location map of the UIC area of review, the corrective action plan if required, your injection well details, the injection well operating plan and procedures, your monitoring, recording, and reporting plan, and then the big one is your monitoring parameters and schedule, and we pretty much set that one up. Here's a little screenshot of the top of the parameter list, and I'm sorry that you can't read that, but that's important because we have actually worked very closely with the Division of Drinking Water on what that schedule would look like. And the reason we have done that is because the UIC program, as I mentioned earlier, is a federal Safe Drinking Water Act program, and everything that happens in the Division of Drinking Water, to my knowledge, is also authorized under the Safe Drinking Water Act, okay? So we are both Safe Drinking Water Act programs, and so we want to make sure that, that whatever the Division of Drinking Water requires, the UIC program requires as well, because the purpose is to protect the quality of drinking water aquifers. Okay, and so this parameter list, this schedule can be as much as 11 pages long, so, all right. So, do you have any additional questions for me? So my knowledge is pretty much the UIC program, so if you have questions about other programs, that's going to have to be deferred to someone else. I just wanted to let you know that my presentation today, our background in ASR is pretty limited. We have maybe 3 ASR projects using UIC wells, and those are pretty much low-hanging fruit sort of projects in which they're injecting drinking water. I mean, it's drinking water quality already. It's instead of going to somebody's tap, it goes into an injection well for later storage. We are starting to work on some of the more challenging ASR projects. We've had some interest in, what about treating wastewater and injecting it? We're going, oh boy, that going to require a whole lot more thinking and looking at a whole lot more programs and rules. And so we've been talking to people in Florida, people in California. So if this comes our way, we need to be prepared. But so I didn't cover that here because we still haven't fleshed out what that's going to look like from water quality standpoint. Yes?
What about putting chlorine down in the aquifer?
Well, that's something that does show up in the parameter list. Okay, we are very concerned about disinfection byproducts. Okay, so I think we have something in there that looks, when we produce water, we say, okay, let's look to see if you've done anything to create anything that's of concern. So that's worked into that. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. What about injecting chlorine into the injection well? And my response is that yes, we have considered that and the concern about disinfection byproducts. So we do have that in our parameter list. We've worked with Division of Drinking Water on that. Rachel Cassidy is the person who helped us compile that schedule, that parameter monitoring list and schedule. So we are definitely concerned about that. So just so the people from drinking water know, we've definitely talked to the people in drinking water about what needs to be considered there. Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much. I think I'll let you.
So this work. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, I think. So before Ying-Ying started up, I wanted to cover a couple things. Someone did have a question about groundwater management plans, what those are and how they relate to this. And the Division of Water Rights does set up groundwater management plans for areas to determine how much water can safely be withdrawn from an aquifer and used. And Aquifer Storage and Recovery projects can sit on top of some of those groundwater management plans and can be used in conjunction with those to either bolster those groundwater systems or replace water that other water rights are being used. So they can work very in conjunctive with Aquifer Storage and Recovery projects. One of the things I was going to mention is Division of Water Rights. A lot of times when you talk, what division do I go to? There's so many of us water divisions here, but when you're dealing with quantities of water, how much water, it's usually the Division of Water Rights, right? We're dealing with quantities. If you're dealing with quality of water, then you're dealing with the Division of Water Quality, right? We do quantity, they do quality. Dealing with drinking water, obviously it's with the Division of Drinking Water. And so we'll turn the time over to Ying-Ying. I will try to help with the mics again. I'm actually going to stand up here, hopefully, and help with mics. So if you see me walking up to you, you'll know to stop, to wait for your question with the mic, and there'll be another one in the back. I'll help from the front. Reminds me of one of my favorite comedians, Brian Regan. I don't know if he has a great skit where he talks about you're at a police conference, right? And you're watching a police conference, and sometimes the questions are pretty important at those conferences, but all you get are the answers. My favorite line from that is, he says you'll hear some like mumbling, like, and the police go, yeah, we found the murder in that neighborhood. So we want to try to avoid some of those questions. So I'll stand up here, and as you see the mic coming up, wait for your question, we'll get that answered. So with that, we'll let Ying-Ying go. All right?
All right, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, let me see.
Let me get to your presentation.
Okay, My name is Ying-Ying Macauley. I'm the Assistant Director with Division of Drinking Water. And I'm going to cover some of the topics. These are the topics I like to present. Did you turn on the short or the long version? Okay, yeah. I want to keep these people here as long as possible. No, I'm going to go through my slides pretty fast. Okay. And now I think James did a great introduction on the 3 divisions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first talk about the overview, the Division of Drinking Water, what we do, and why we get involved in ASR projects. And then I'm going to talk about 3 aspects of reviewing ASR project in Division of Drinking Water: water quality aspect, the project design aspect, and what water systems can do to prepare for ASR projects. Then I'm going to talk about the Division of Drinking Water's review process. Now, let's talk about what's the mission. The Division of Drinking Water's mission is we want to make sure we have a safe and reliable supply of drinking water. So when you do an ASR project, when you inject water into the aquifer and try to pump it out to use it for drinking water, it affects the quantity and the quality of drinking water. So that's why Division of Drinking Water gets involved. Division of Drinking Water, we currently regulates more than 1,000 public water systems in Utah. So if you try to do an ASR project, the first question you ask, am I regulated by the Division of Drinking Water? Do you meet the definition of being a public water system? So I'm going to talk about the thresholds. If your water system serves 15 connections or more, this water system, by definition, is a public drinking water system. And we have a fine line says, under the same ownership or control. Sometimes we encounter some developers, they try to develop 7-lot subdivision, and the next one is another 7-lot, another 7-lot, to avoid this threshold. So if adjacent properties are under the same ownership or control, we lump them together. So we close out that loophole. Or if a water system serves 25 people for at least 60 days out of a year. How do we define 25 people or 60 days out of a year? It's not possible for Division of Drinking Water staff to go out like a Costco clicker thing, say how many people show up during how many weekends. We don't do that. So what we do is we look at the population served based on the capacity of the water system. If the water system has a total of 20 cabins, then based on the census data, 20 cabins times 3.13 people per household. We say you have about 60 people. So it's the capacity of the system. We don't care how many people actually show up to use these summer cabins. Same as the operating period. We have no way to track how many weekends people show up using these facilities. So all we care is operating period. If this water system starts to operate on May 1st and ends its operation on October 31st, the entire period is how many days they serve the public. Okay. Now, the Division of Drinking Water's plan review program, we require plan review projects of the project that would affect the quantity and the quality of drinking water. Those are called public drinking water projects. When we require plan review, we have 3 aspects that we do. First is we review and approve the proposed design. That includes engineering plans and specifications put together by a licensed engineer. Then we make sure during our review, we see whether the design meets the regulations specified in Utah Administrative Code R309. We also check whether the design meets a standard engineering practices. Now, the engineering review program administered by the Division of Drinking Water, we have two groups of engineers doing the review. We have the Division of Drinking Water engineers doing the projects in the northwestern quadrant of Utah. And we also have 4 district engineers. They are the Department of Environmental Quality employees, but they help us with the engineering review. They cover 4 districts: Central Utah, which is shown in the purple part of the map, and Southwest Utah, the pink portion. Southeastern Utah, you see the brown in San Juan County and the green colored counties. And the tri-counties, the 3 counties in the northeast quadrant. Then now I'm going to talk about when we review ASR projects, what do we look for regarding water quality? If the water you intend to inject is considered groundwater, we do require you show us the past results of coliform or E. coli data. So we want to know the source water is good quality. We wouldn't want you to inject low quality water into the ground and try to use it later. And sometimes we will require on-site inspection. We want to make sure, for example, if it's a spring water you want to inject, if we do an on-site inspection, we saw that you have uncaptured spring water running off, there's a pond right next to it, we'll consider this spring is high risk of being influenced by surface water. And we require recent sample results, and some of the examples, we want the source sample, the water you want to inject. For example, we ask for BACT data such as total coliform, fecal coliform, or E. coli. We also ask dissolved oxygen data, and Candace had mentioned that dissolved oxygen sometimes change the redox of the water. And when the water is injected into a groundwater aquifer, it changes the interaction between the water and the geological formation. So sometimes you see the water quality change when you try to pump the water out. And then the MPA is a microscopic particulate analysis. It's a special analysis that we require. Typically, it's a spring or is poorly constructed well. We will require the MPA sample to make sure, to verify whether these sources are subject to surface water influence. One example is if we require you to take the BACT sample, we will require you to take the sample at a location that's prior to any treatment or disinfection. So it's indicative of the true source sample result. And we also will require you to take it during warm month because based on our experience, the majority of the BACT violations happens during the summer month. It's hard to have BACT, violations during cold months like January or February, but it's very common. The water system that runs just fine, all of a sudden they start to have BACT problem in May, June, July, August, and then it went away in November because the bacteriological activities is related to water temperature. If your proposal is you want to inject treated surface water, and one example is like Jordan Valley. Jordan Valley has treated surface water being injected into the ground, and we will require the treated surface water must meet the complete treatment requirement. So the surface water treatment is very different from just using chlorination to treat groundwater. The surface water treatment requirement include several specific aspects. For example, we require you to treat it in a manner that you can deal with giardia, crypto, and virus. And we also require for treating surface water, you must have filtration process and chlorination process, and you have to maintain the chlorine residual. And now let's talk about disinfectant residual. In our practice, we have required the water, treated surface water you want to inject into the ground shall have chlorine residual. At least it has to be detectable. Second, it cannot exceed 0.5 ppm. So you would think, oh, having chlorine, the more is better. But Candace mentioned the disinfection byproduct contaminants. If you have too high of a chlorine, it sits, after the injection, it sits in the ground, it's reacting, and you will have increased DBP, disinfection byproduct contaminants. So that's why we have a very narrow range of the disinfectant residual that's allowed in the treated surface water you want to inject into the ground. Now let's talk about design, and I'm going to just, talk about some examples of the factors we consider in design. For example, when you propose a project to Division of Drinking Water, you need to identify, is this project a pilot or it's a full scale? We need to know that. For example, if it's a pilot, it could be you don't need to do any modification to the existing equipment. If it's a full scale, you may have to modify your well significantly, or sometimes you have to construct a transmission pipe to deliver the source water to the injection site. Second example is a one well or two wells configuration. Sometimes water system use a one well. It's the same well for injection and recovery. Sometimes it's two separate wells, two locations, one for recharge, one for recovery. We need to know how that is designed. Then you need to talk about what method you're going to use to deliver the source to your injection site, and what kind of method are you going to use for your injection. And one example is let's pretend it's a town. They have excess capacity in the spring water. The spring is located on one end of the town, but they have an injection well that's on the other end of the town. So now to deliver the source water all the way from one end of town, across the town to the injection site, you have to consider, how about the hydraulics? Does that work? Do you all of a sudden have a 3-inch pipe in the middle or something? So we need to look into that. So hydraulic evaluation, all these things need to be considered, okay? Now let's talk about what public water systems can do to prepare for ASR project. First thing they can do is they start to gather water quality data. The water quality data from the source, including BACT, dissolved oxygen, or MPA sample result if needed. And they also need to look at the distribution system's sample result. For example, if the source water is really good, you have 3 years of high quality source data. The source is not a problem. Distribution system, unfortunately, the test 2 summers, they all have positive BACT detected in distribution system. When you do your design, won't you think twice? If your source is good, your distribution is bad, sometimes maybe the distribution system has a lot of old pipes that's subject to contamination. Maybe you should consider don't deliver the water through your existing distribution system. Maybe construct a new transmission pipe to bypass the problematic distribution system. The next thing you can do is to gather operation data. For example, if you want to inject the spring, you got to have the flow history of this spring. You got to know the pattern. Is this a spring has a wide variety of the spring capacity, or it's very consistent in its flow production? Second bullet, cross connection. What that means is, do you have any high risk operations within your distribution system? For example, do you have any aging water pipes that tend to be, create a positive bacteria result? Or do you have any connections that's connecting to, some example, stock watering trough, or dairy operation, or industrial, operation that may induce the chemicals back into your drinking water system? You got to identify, do you have cross-connection concerns within your drinking water system? Also, it's good to know your distribution system. Do you have any hydraulic limitations? The pipe size, right? Or the water pressure sufficient? Or if you start to pipe the water to inject it down the ground, would that create a low pressure issue for your distribution system or for your customers? You got to know your water system operation well. And now talk to the right people. You have seen Candace and James' list of which agencies you need to talk to. It's a long list. However, I would encourage you, find a good consultant who is experienced in ASR projects. Sometimes some small town will come to us, say, hey, we have this idea, we want to do the ASR project. So can we use a consultant that we've been using? They've been dealing with the waterline projects. They have done a fantastic job on the waterline design. We want to use them for ASR project. And I would ask them, say, does this consultant also show that he has knowledge and experience in dealing with ASR projects? Sometimes the consultants, they all have their own niche, and you need to find the right consultant to help you with the ASR projects. Now, the DDW plan review process, it's relatively simple, but I'll give you the overview. But my suggestion is, if you're interested in doing the ASR project, contact us so we can assign an engineer who can guide you through our process. Okay, the typical process is you submit a form. We call it project notification form, and you provide the required information. Then the division engineer, we will review the engineering plans and specs and the data you submit. And if we feel it's sufficient, we'll issue a plan approval to allow construction. If it's a pilot project, at this point, that's your approval to start your pilot. Okay. And if it's a full-scale project, you have to do construction or modification. And then after you get the approval, the water system can start to construct the proposed project. Then Division of Drinking Water, we may conduct the inspection. After the project is completed, then we issue an operating permit. This operating permit is different from the plan approval I mentioned earlier. Plan approval means we review your proposed design, we give you approval to start the construction. The operating permit means your construction has been completed, and we issue a permit to allow you to place the new facility into service. And I think so far, I just realized today that the folks in Division of Drinking Water, we don't have a good sense in business. We don't do all these things for free. We don't charge any fee. I may have to go back and think twice about our practice. Okay, now when you submit an ASR project to the Division of Drinking Water, I'm going to give you some example what information you need to include. Does everyone have the handout? And the handout, you have a copy of my presentation slides. Also, on the second page is a list of the ASR review items the Division of Drinking Water will require. Okay, if you have any questions, call us and we'll go through this list in detail with you. Now, for example, you got to describe what kind of source are you injecting and what kind of water quality data you have. And sometimes you also need to explain the purpose of this injection, because sometimes the ASR project could be just as simple as you want to enhance the quantity of the water that you can use later on. That's really simple. But sometimes a water system may propose an ASR project to deal with a water quality issue. So we got to know what's the purpose of your ASR project. And then you describe how are you going to deliver the source water and what kind of injection method you're going to use. And then you identify injection period and quantity to us. And then you have to find a professional engineer who can put together the engineering plans and specifications for the Division of Drinking Water's review. And this engineer should also do a thorough assessment of the drinking water system to make sure the ASR project will not cause any harm to the existing drinking water system. All right, I achieved my goal. I finished this ahead of time. Any question?
Throughout the last two presentations, the word injection has been used to describe the recharge of the aquifer. Is there a difference between recharge in a well and infiltration in a pond? And is it regulated differently? Is this process different if you're just putting it in a pond?
This is Candace. If you're going to achieve aquifer recharge through an infiltration pond that does not meet the definition of an injection well, as I described in my presentation, then you will need to talk to Dan Hall, who is the section manager of the groundwater protection section in the Division of Water Quality. And I believe that he's engaged people who are trying to do this. And I think the same thing, it will depend upon the specifics of each project as to how that will be regulated. But if it will not be regulated under the UIC program if the injection mechanism does not meet the definition of an injection well. So it will go to the division, or will go to the same division, but it possibly will be permitted under a groundwater discharge permit.
And from Division of Drinking Water point of view, I think the word recharge and injection, they do mean different. You know, they have different meanings for us. I'm going to use the infiltration gallery as an example. If your construction is to introduce surface water into the aquifer, and our concern is that let's make sure that aquifer is not a drinking water aquifer. Because, as I mentioned earlier, our goal is to make sure we have a safe and reliable drinking water supply. So when you just do the surface infiltration, and usually coming from a pond, you know, to a shallow aquifer, if that shallow aquifer is not used for drinking water purpose and there's no interconnection with the deeper aquifer, it may be okay to the Division of Drinking Water. However, if you do the infiltration, and there is a risk to introduce contaminants into the deep drinking water aquifer, then we will have concern on that.
If I can just add one comment, if you intend to use an infiltration basin, but you find that your infiltration rate is not great enough, and you decide, well, I can increase my infiltration if I put a standpipe in the middle of my pond, then it becomes a UIC issue, okay? So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Paul Inkenbrandt. I work for the Utah Geological Survey. I've been working with them for the past 8 years. I did my master's thesis on this area I'll be talking about today. The reason I think they had me here is because I kind of offer a non-regulatory viewpoint, and I'll give you an idea of some of the technical aspects of what's required in these pilot studies. So I'm going to talk about Millville as my example project. It's like a good case study, and it covers almost every topic that the earlier speakers have covered today. So it'll be a good way to review and apply it to a real-world situation. So the Utah Geological Survey has worked on a few different ASR pilot projects. Hugh Herlo, who's now the program head of the groundwater group, he worked on the Weber River Basin project, and then myself and Kevin Thomas did several investigations up in Cache Valley, and we looked at a gravel pit in the North Logan, and then we pretty much did a complete pilot study in Millville, and that's what I'll be talking about today. And all these are links to the studies. We have all of these on our website, and again, these slides will be provided on the Division of Water Rights website. So when you're conducting a pilot study, you're kind of trying to get at answering a number of different questions. And these, most of these questions are concerns that the regulators have. But these are things that you should probably be concerned about as well, like where your water is going to end up. You know, if you dump water into an infiltration gallery on the surface, will that go into your aquifer of interest, or will that end up in the guy next door's basement? It's kind of an important question to ask, and pilot study is a good way to try to get at that. And you know, one really big concern, and something I spent a lot of time on looking at this Millville study, is how will this affect the groundwater chemistry? You know, whenever you introduce water from an outside source or a different groundwater source even, you could potentially significantly change the groundwater chemistry of your aquifer that you're recharging to, and that's a big deal. So here's kind of the steps I laid out for a successful pilot study, and I think some of the earlier speakers mentioned these. First thing you want to do is kind of get an idea of how you want to conduct your test, and you want to compile existing information. So there could have been a lot of work done already on your area, and you could save yourself a lot of effort just by doing a little bit of research. And then you want to meet with the regulators and get the necessary permits to conduct your pilot study. And I won't go into that into great detail because we've already talked about that to some extent. and then you want to look at the background conditions of your site, and then modify and build infrastructure, and then conduct your test, and then measure the conditions afterwards. So I'll talk about each one of those in detail. So the first thing you want to do is kind of plan where you want to infiltrate your water. And sometimes this requires just a feasibility study, just a review of your area that you have available to infiltrate water. And things you want to think about is, where is the water that you're going to infiltrate? Where does that at, and how hard will it be to get to the site that you want to put that water in the ground? So that was actually a big one for a lot of the areas we looked at in Cache Valley, is the availability of water that you could store in the ground. And then you also want to examine how you plan on putting that water in the ground. So that could be through injection or surface application. I have a picture here of Cedar City's or Cedar City Valley's infiltration gallery, and they have this really nice technical setup of infiltrating surface water. They had a couple of neat pits to do that. And then how much water are you planning on putting in the ground, both for your pilot study and for your full-scale application? Candace shared this document with me earlier. It's from the National Groundwater Association. It's a guideline document, and it's a good place to start, and it gets you thinking about the different aspects of aquifer storage and recovery, and there's the link to that right there. So here's where I generally start when I'm starting to compile existing information. I look at the major agencies who have done any kind of hydrogeologic work in the area. So I always go to the Utah Geological Survey and the USGS websites first and do a publication search on that area. And then the Division of Water Rights also has a number of really good old DNR publications. A lot of them were joint studies between the USGS and the UGS, and they generally have a lot of good hydrogeology information for different parts of the state. And then the next thing I do is to start to pull together the existing water chemistry data, and the groundwater or the water quality data portal is the go-to location for me because they pull together data from both the EPA and the USGS. And then you also want to look at water level data, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit, but both the Utah Geological Survey and the USGS hold groundwater data, and they have a bunch of it available online, so it's really easy to access. And then what's really key, especially for pulling together the necessary information for the regulatory paperwork, is water well data, and that's all provided. I think all of the water well logs are scanned in now and available on the Division of Water Rights webpage. So that's a very important source of information. So this is kind of what we did for Millville. All of these little points on the map here represent different wells, and that's one of the things we had to do was figure out all of the, what did Candace call them, artificial penetration points, and tabulate them in a table. And so that's what all of these points are. Those are wells, and all of that was pulled from the Division of Drinking, or the Division of Water Rights website. And they actually have a really nice GIS file that you can download in Google Earth or ArcGIS format of all of their points of diversion, and you just winnow that down to wells. And then in terms of water level data, here are the go-to links for both our clearinghouse and the USGS's INWIS site, which is really key. And you can't really see it on this map very well, but there's these really light blue lines, and these show the potentiometric surface or the groundwater level in these wells, and that gives you an idea of what direction it's flowing. And it's also an important part of conducting that preliminary hydrogeologic study for regulatory work. And then you can use those same well logs to make your cross sections, and that's what these squiggly lines here represent, is the various cross sections we did for the Millville area. So Millville's outlined in red here. This purple circle indicates the area of review. Also could be considered the area of influence. And then all of these different color lines represent the cross sections we did for Millville. And just to show you, you just get the water well data from the well logs, and you kind of interpret what the drillers interpret it and interpolate across. And here's the situation in Millville. We have two fairly continuous clay layers and then some more gravelly layers in between. And knowing about the presence or absence of these clay layers is really key, especially if you're trying to decide, are we going to inject this water or are we going to try to spread it on the surface? Because if Millville wanted to spread this water, let's say on the surface here in this gravelly unit C2, it would probably just come out as springs just downhill, right? So it's really important to know the hydrogeology, and I think that's why it's one of the requirements of making these cross sections and figuring out the hydrogeologic situation is so save yourself a lot of time and headache and effort down the road, and it really drives how your ASR project is set up. So, of course, you have to meet with the regulators, and I won't go into this in great detail because we just talked about this, but just make sure it's really helpful. I found for the Millville project that we had everybody in the same room talking to each other, so everybody's on the same page. And there aren't any surprises. You definitely don't want to go dumping water into the ground and somebody call you up later on and say, be surprised about it. It's a horrible thing to happen. So it's good to get everybody in the same room and on the same page, and that's what we did with the Millville project. And I think when we were doing Millville, things were kind of still coming to fruition. We were still, all of these agencies are still getting used to the idea of aquifer storage and recovery. So that right now I think they have a really good framework in place for these pilot projects, and it should go smoother. And yeah, we already talked about this slide, so I'll skip to the next one. So one of the things you want to do in terms of measuring background conditions for these pilot studies, you really want an idea of what the water chemistry is like before you put any other water in the ground. Because if you don't know what the water chemistry is like beforehand and you add something and it all of a sudden goes really wrong, then you have some idea of what happened. So one really important thing, and this was mentioned a couple times, is getting an idea of the redox state. And this is best measured with just pH, dissolved oxygen, and they make oxidation reduction potential meters, which give you an idea of that oxidation state. And here's kind of a chart showing different waters that you can encounter and what their oxidation state is. Most of the water in Cache Valley kind of falls into this oxidizing type environment, so an oxygen-rich water, and very little of it, there's some, but very little of it is reducing. And there's different ways you can use just the general chemistry of your water to figure out whether it's oxidizing or reducing. But there's a lot of good documentation out there. There's a really good book on aquifer storage and recovery that goes into great detail. But you definitely don't want to reproduce what happened in Flint, Michigan, where they changed their water source and mobilized metals in their old pipes because of the change of oxidation state. That would not be good. Another thing we looked at for Millville was the nitrate situation. And that's part of the reason why they approached this, is because this is the nitrate levels where red are higher concentrations and blue are lower in the city of Millville. And it gives you an idea. They had a high nitrate concentration right near their supply well, which is a star here. And they wanted to try to reduce that by storing some of their spring water from their spring source, which is right around here somewhere, I think. Is that right near the right area? And so one of the things we looked at before we added any water was what are the existing nitrate concentrations. And other things you want to probably look at are things that could be mobilized or brought into the water, like arsenic and lead and even uranium in some cases. All of these things could be potentially mobilized by a changing redox situation, and it's something you want to measure closely whenever you're adding a different water to your aquifer. So metals are something we examined while we were doing this study as well. General chemistry is really helpful. Like I mentioned earlier, gives you an idea of what the redox conditions are. It also can give you a good idea of how the aquifer chemistry might be changing over time. And it allows you to compare to other water sources. In some cases, you can even use it for general water chemistry models. This plot is just showing you statistical distributions of the different water in Cache Valley area. And then stable isotopes is a huge help. And this kind of plays into the quantity side of things. You can, if you have two very different end members where you have your aquifer waters, one specific stable isotope measure and your recharge water is fairly different from that, and you mix the two, you could find out exactly the quantities that were mixed with these stable isotope values. And the samples are relatively cheap, and I think I brought a sample with me to show you how big of a sample you need. So you need about that much water, and it's about $7 a sample. But this was a huge help in the Millville study of figuring out how much water we recovered and how much water we put in. And right now we're using the U of U lab to do our isotope analysis, but most colleges will conduct those type of analysis. So in terms of the background conditions, like I mentioned earlier, another thing you want to know about is where your groundwater table is at. And this is important, not just being worried about flooding somebody's basement, but also potentially mobilizing stuff that's in the unsaturated zone. So if you have a lot of septic systems in the area, like Millville had, and you raise your groundwater level significantly, you could potentially capture a lot of nitrate that's hanging out in that unsaturated zone. So it's something you want to be aware of, and you want to know what your groundwater table is like and how it's changing when you add that water. Okay, once you get a good idea of your background situation and you get approval from the regulators, you can modify the infrastructure. I can't speak to this too much because Millville took the reins on this, and I think they did a pretty good job. Some of the things worth pointing out, this is their well setup, and they had meters on both the pipe where the water was going into the well, which is the smaller pipe up here, and the pipe where the water was being pumped out of the well. This was the original works here. So those meters were very important in measuring the volumes being extracted and added to the system. And then we had a number of sample points where we could take periodic water quality samples, and those were also key. And then it's also worthwhile to put in some way of measuring water level continuously over time. We use these little transducers, pressure transducers a lot, and they can measure water level every second if we want them to. We usually have them set up for hourly, but they're really useful because you can use the water level information both to figure out what the aquifer properties are and also to see how your water level is changing as you inject and pump the water from the well. And this is kind of a conceptual diagram showing what you're doing when you're injecting this water. You're essentially, here's your spring water in the case of the Millville setup, is this light blue, and then there's some mixing fringe with your aquifer water and your spring water. And ideally, you want to pump all of this light blue stuff out and recover as much of it as possible in a recharge and recovery situation. And so here is the, we conducted the test, and what we were trying to measure is the amount of water we were capturing back after we injected it. And first we did a little tiny injection test, which is what this little orange blip is, about 10 acre-feet total. And then we let it sit in the aquifer for a few weeks, and then we pumped out as much of it as we could. And this little orange sliver here is the volume we pumped out. We essentially pumped out the same volume of original water that we injected. And then we did a much larger scale test once we figured that it was possible. And here is the amount we injected. This is a cumulative graph. It shows 150 acre-feet was injected. And we let that sit in the aquifer for a few months and then started to pump it out again. And the orange is what we were able to recover out of that. So we recovered about, I think it was 20% of what was injected. We recovered, and this is aquifer water. And this is based on those isotope values. So, you know, you're able to get a rough idea of percentages. Nitrate is actually also a really good tracer if you have a large amount of nitrate in your system, but I don't recommend injecting it or anything like that. But it's fairly conservative in groundwater systems unless you have some major changes in redox state. And we use that to verify the isotopes. And these are just some quantities. We don't need to go over them in great detail, but we were able to get numbers like this by using the stable isotope values is what this slide is for. This shows the pressure transducer readout of the smaller test we did. And all this noise is from injecting. And then this shows our pumping. And with this pumping curve, we were able to figure out what the aquifer transmissivity at the Glen Ridge well was. And then there's the recovery after we turned off the pump in the stable background conditions. And the transducer we were using also was able to measure water chemistry over time, the specific conductance.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If we go to your last slide,
Bummer. In regard to your last slide right here, you're showing like a depth of water, roughly 58 feet, 57, 58 feet. Mm-hmm. If you went back over and looked at your cross-section where you're showing that clay layer, mm-hmm. I presume this well is going through the clay layer. Is that
it
true?
It is, yeah.
And so is it under pressure so that the water is coming up through the clay layer? What's going on with that?
I think in the area of the well, it is a confined system. Yeah, so you do have water above the confining layer in that area. Just to the east, it's unconfined. That's where your recharge, what I think is the major recharge point for the aquifer is, just up gradient. So yeah, you have a confined aquifer where that Glen Ridge well is, and that's why the water is above the confining layer. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Great.
Wondered if it, affected how you design things. And
It's important, and James spoke on confined aquifers a little bit when he was talking about the review process, I think, and you were talking about the amount of time, residence time, and stuff like that. And this is the nitrate values in various sources in the vicinity of that well. The red line here being the Glen Ridge well, which we injected into, and you can see it was hanging out right around 8 milligrams per liter. We injected the spring water, and it went down to the concentration of the spring water, of course. And then it slowly, as we pumped that bubble of water out, it slowly returned to the concentration of the aquifer water. And then all of these other lines represent different nearby sources. One that's slightly concerning, and I'm still monitoring closely, is the nearby Providence well had an increase in nitrate, but it's hard. We still need more data to see exactly what's going on with that. And then I saved a couple of videos for the last bit. Hopefully I can get them to play. So this video is a model. There was an existing model, groundwater model of Cache Valley. That's the injection bubble going into the well. There's the well. And then they pumped it back out, and you could see it shrinking. And then we had larger time spans showing it what was left drifting off. So that's from the larger test. Just to get an idea of how long can we leave that water in there before it drifts away from our point of injection, and how much of it can we recover. And so we're able to kind of show that with the groundwater model as well. And you can do different, the nice thing about this is you can do different scenarios of an injection and pumping, and it will help, especially water rights, make decisions about how much water you can put in and take out. And it also is useful for, I have one more video. It's also useful for playing with the idea of contaminant transport and trying to figure out the source of different things. Or, if for whatever reason you have a contamination in your injection source, you can use modeling to help you figure out where that might go. In this case, we were kind of trying to figure out where the major source of nitrate in the Glen Ridge well was. And this kind of shows the movement of nitrate through the groundwater system from different points in the city, to get an idea of why we're seeing the concentrations we are in the different areas. And I think that is... Yeah. So in summary, for any pilot study, knowing what your background conditions are is essential, both water level and water quality. And it's really important, if you're dealing with an injection system or public water supply, of course, all of the parameters that are mandated, but it's also for field-based stuff, it's really important to measure your pH, your oxidation reduction potential, dissolved oxygen. All of those are going to be very useful for you when you're trying to write up meet these regulatory guidelines. And then having a well near your point, even if it's a surface spreading site, having a monitoring well nearby is essential. And sometimes you can use pre-existing wells, which is what we did in Millville, but you might have to put in your own. But it makes a huge difference in understanding the system. And I swear I'm not a salesperson for stable isotopes, but they're very useful for these type of studies. And that ends with questions. Candace?
Yes, I wanted to know what the time scale was for the videos that you just...
Oh, I think they were different for each one. So The first one was over the duration of our injection and recovery period. So I think it was 5 or 6 months total. And then the second one was a decade, I think, if I remember. It's been a long time since I did that, so, but I think it was a decade. Very transmissive aquifer in that case.
What kind of isotope did you use and how did you inject it?
Oh, so we just used the stable isotopes of the water. So we didn't inject any tracer in this instance, though you potentially could. So the spring had a different enough stable isotope values than the aquifer water that we were able to do some mixing calculations. Just use those two as end members and figure out what your water is that you're pumping out afterwards. And that kind of gives you percentages of each one. But if they're really similar water in terms of isotope values, it won't work.
Could you add a tracer at that point then?
Potentially, I've seen it done, but we have never done it before. And there's a few different. I can't speak to the tracer options too much for that kind of study, but I've seen it done. And in some extreme scenarios, you could use dye even if you have a really fast system, but that's mainly for karst type stuff.
I was just wondering which isotopes you used. Were you using tritium or deuterium oxygen? Or?
Yep, both. Yep. Hydrogen and oxygen of water. We also looked at the stable isotopes of nitrogen to try to determine the source of nitrate contamination in the area. And I think we're pretty sure it's septic systems, which makes sense.
Are there any other questions for anybody, any of the presenters other than just Paul, now that we've got to the end? Not? Oh.
Put you back on the spot here, James, but in regard to the division's website, when you're tracking these recharge and recovery types of applications, would you mind demonstrating where you find those applications at and the data that's available that you spoke of in your presentation?
No, I don't mind.
Good.
So this is our website here, Utah Division of Water Rights. If you just Google Utah Water Rights, that'll be the first hit, but it's waterrights.utah.gov. The first thing I would show is that this meeting here that we've just done under our past meeting site, which is here and there, there'll be a link here at the very top with the date and the title of this meeting, and it'll have all these presentations on there and the video of this whole presentation, so you can go back and watch and get all the slides and all the information that we've presented. But under data, then groundwater, we have recharge recovery projects, and there is a map of all these projects, and there is a listing of all these current projects that we have. And you can go in and click on these links, and it'll give you the full details of those projects, all the reports they've submitted for those projects, all the actions we've taken on those projects, and all the details for the Division of Water Rights. Over here, you click on here and it'll show you the account balance that Jordan Valley's water aquifer storage and recovery is. So as you scroll down, you'll see all the amounts that they've recharged, all the amounts that they recovered, and throughout the years, and shows currently what is their total available balance of water in that recharge basin, how much loss has been applied over the years, and whatnot for their given project. And so any of these projects, we'll set up this account. It'll all be available online to see how much water you've recharged and recovered. And additionally, this same interface, you get a login for the users that are part of it, and they can go add those amounts and right online. So all that information is there available for those individuals. So if that answers that question. I did have a question at the break about the process we go through, right? Any water right application has a process. We advertise those applications. We take protests of those applications, and it goes through a given process. And if you'd like to learn more about that process, we have other trainings and whatnot that go into detail about those processes. And we actually have YouTube videos that show those trainings. You can Google see on our website. So there, under that link I just clicked on, is our YouTube page that shows all these YouTube videos. We have quite a few now, actually, of all the different processes. And this one we did today is going to be added to that to show all the different types of applications and process we take. There's now a YouTube video for most of those showing a training similar to this. So instead of watching me do a snow angel in the snow in my bathing suit, you can watch a very interesting video instead of water at application processing types. I'm hoping that that's not the next recommended video after you watch this one. But if there are no more questions, we have one in the back. No.
So we do have a couple other trainings that we have scheduled that I just want to get on your calendars. I know we have lots of cities that are here and some consultants that deal with water rights on a regular basis. So on May 8th in this same room, we will be training on proofs and certificates. We don't have a video yet for that detail, but that will be recorded for that. And that's May 8th, 9 a.m. Watch our website for those details. And then again, August 15th, we will be doing another title training. So for those of you that deal with water right title updates, in this room again, same setup. So mark your calendars, and we hope to just help you understand the processes that we go through in our programs. So.
Thank you, and I'm really grateful to these other divisions to get together. As I've learned something today that Division of Water Rights, we're really interested in the water quantity, environmental quality. They really want to protect that aquifer, right? And then the Division of Drinking Water is really trying to protect that drinking water system. And so all of us play a pretty key role in this. And I know it can be frustrating sometimes having to deal with so many different agencies, but those expertise are really in those agencies, and we will work together to help permit these processes. And if you have a project you want to get involved, we are more than willing, all three agencies, to get together at a meeting together and work through the specifics of your given project from the initial phase all the way to the end. So with that, you have one more thing to say?
I keep grabbing the wrong one. So Ross just reminded me, we at the Water Users Conference that's coming up here in March, I'm sure many of you are going to be there. The Wednesday after that conference at 1 p.m. down there, we will be doing a proof training as well. So we'll kind of put a plug in for that.
Okay. All right. With that, thank you very much.